Moving into a new apartment is always a mix of excitement and stress. New beginnings, a fresh space to call your own, and the thrill of decorating it just the way you like. That's how I felt when I first moved into the old brick building on Maple Street. The place had character. High ceilings, original wood floors, and big windows that let in lots of light. But it also had a certain atmosphere. I didn't think much of it at first. In fact, I kind of liked it. It felt like the apartment had a story to tell. Little did I know, I was about to become part of that story. I moved in on a warm Saturday afternoon. Everything seemed fine at first. The apartment was a bit drafty, and the creaking floors added a spooky charm, but it was nothing out of the ordinary. The neighbors were quiet, and the building itself was mostly empty. I was told that it had once been a boarding house in the early 1900s, but had been converted into apartments decades ago. The landlord, an older man named Mr. Harris, was a bit eccentric but seemed harmless enough. He gave me the keys, mumbled something about the building having a lot of history, and left me to settle in. The first night in the apartment was peaceful. I unpacked, made a quick dinner, and settled in with a movie. As I lay in bed, I noticed how quiet the building was. The kind of quiet that makes you realize how used to noise you are. The silence was so intense that I could hear every creak, every distant sound from the street outside. But I told myself it was just the newness of the place and drifted off to sleep. A few nights later, I began to notice small things. At first, it was subtle. A misplaced item, a door slightly ajar when I was sure I'd closed it, lights flickering for no apparent reason. I brushed it off as forgetfulness and old wiring, but then it started happening more frequently. I'd leave a book on the coffee table and find it on the kitchen counter the next morning. Or I'd hear the sound of footsteps in the hallway outside my door, only to find the corridor empty when I checked. One night, I woke up suddenly to the sound of whispering. It was faint, almost like a breeze, but there were distinct voices. I sat up in bed, straining to hear, but the whispering stopped as soon as I became fully awake. My heart was pounding, but I convinced myself it was just a dream. Maybe the stress of the move was getting to me. But things escalated quickly after that. I started hearing noises in the walls, scratching, like something trying to get out. It happened at all hours of the day, sometimes so loud that it was impossible to ignore. I called the landlord to complain, but Mr. Harris just shrugged it off, saying the building was old and that I shouldn't worry about it. One evening, as I was sitting in the living room, I noticed something strange about the large mirror that hung above the fireplace. The mirror was one of the apartment's original fixtures, with an ornate, antique frame. As I glanced at it, I thought I saw something move in the reflection, but when I looked directly at it, there was nothing there. I chalked it up to my imagination, but as I continued to stare at the mirror, a chill ran down my spine. It was as if something was just out of sight, hiding in the shadows of the reflection. The next day, I decided to do some research on the building. I went to the local library and started digging through old records, hoping to find something that might explain the strange occurrences. What I found was more than I bargained for. The building had a dark history. In the early 1900s, it had been a boarding house run by a woman named Mrs. Winters. She was known in the neighborhood as a kind, if somewhat reclusive, woman who kept to herself. But there were rumors, whispers of strange rituals and mysterious disappearances. According to the records, several boarders had gone missing over the years, with no trace of them ever found. The police had investigated but never found enough evidence to charge Mrs. Winters with any crime. Eventually, the boarding house was closed down, and the building sat vacant for years before being converted into apartments. As I read through the old newspaper articles, I felt a growing sense of unease. The descriptions of the missing boarders sent chills down my spine. Young men and women, most of them new to the city, lured in by the promise of cheap rent and a friendly face. But once they moved in, they were never seen again. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something connecting those disappearances to what I was experiencing in my apartment. I needed answers, so I decided to confront Mr. Harris. I went to his office, armed with the information I'd found, but when I brought up the building's history, he became visibly uncomfortable. He refused to talk about it, saying it was all just old rumors and stories. That night, things took a turn for the worse. I was lying in bed, trying to sleep, when I heard the whispering again. This time it was louder, more distinct. I could make out words, but they were in a language I didn't understand. My heart raced as the whispers grew closer, seeming to surround me. I sat up in bed, and as I did, I felt a cold breath on the back of my neck. I jumped out of bed and ran to the living room, flicking on every light in the apartment. The room was empty, but the atmosphere was thick with a sense of dread. I glanced at the mirror above the fireplace and froze. There, in the reflection, was a shadowy figure standing behind me. It was a dark silhouette, its features obscured, but I could feel its eyes on me, watching, waiting. I spun around, but there was nothing there. My breath came in short gasps as I backed away from the mirror. The figure in the reflection didn't move, but its presence was oppressive, filling the room with a suffocating sense of fear. I couldn't stay there any longer. I grabbed my keys and fled the apartment, not stopping until I was outside in the cool night air. I spent that night in my car, too afraid to go back inside. The next morning, I returned to the apartment with a friend, Lisa, who had agreed to help me pack up and get out of there. I wasn't going to spend another night in that place. As we packed, the atmosphere in the apartment grew darker, more oppressive. The scratching in the walls was louder than ever, and the whispering seemed to follow us from room to room. Lisa was visibly shaken, but she tried to stay calm, reassuring me that we would be out of there soon. Then, as we were packing up the bedroom, we found something that stopped us in our tracks. Hidden in the back of the closet was a small wooden box, covered in dust. I don't know why, but I felt compelled to open it. Inside, we found a collection of old black and white photographs. The photos were of the building, but not as it looked now. They showed the boarding house as it had been in the early 1900s, with the faces of the boarders who had gone missing. But there was something else in the photos, something that sent a chill down my spine. In each photograph, there was a shadowy figure standing in the background, just like the one I had seen in the mirror. The figure was always in the same place, just out of focus, watching the people in the photos. The last photo in the box was of Mrs. Winters herself, standing in front of the boarding house. And there, behind her, was the same shadowy figure, its eyes locked on the camera, as if it knew it was being photographed. Lisa and I stared at the photos in horror, realizing that whatever was in those pictures was still in the building. We quickly finished packing and left the apartment, not looking back. I broke my lease and never returned to that building. I don't know what happened to the other tenants, or if they experienced the same things I did, but I wasn't going to stick around to find out. To this day, I can't explain what I saw in that apartment. I've tried to rationalize it, to tell myself it was just my imagination, but the memories are too vivid, too real. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear the whispers, faint and distant, as if they're trying to reach me from the other side. And every now and then, I catch a glimpse of a shadowy figure in the corner of my eye, watching, waiting. I've moved on with my life, but the experience has left a mark on me. I don't know what it was that haunted that apartment, or why it chose to reveal itself to me, but I do know one thing. Some stories are better left untold, and some doors are better left closed. Because once you open them, you might not be able to shut them again.